Everyone is busy going through their busy lives. Sungwoo steps out of a crowded bus. He seems to be pretty exhausted from his travel. He has to go through this rough bus travel daily because he is commuting from his home. His friend Hanho makes fun of him because Sungwoo completed his harsh military service as a Special Forces Reserve Sergeant, and now he can't even bear 2 hours of commute. Sungwoo gets back at Hanho by reminding him that he did not even complete his military service because of a girl, Myeong. After hearing this insult, Hanho becomes completely silent and they head towards their class. On their way, Sungwoo feels a bit bad about the silence of his friend and asks him if Hanho is crying. Hanho points towards the sky at the top of the library building and tells Sungwoo that he saw a message in the sky saying, "Downloading monsters," and that message disappeared after the timing reached 100%. Sungwoo thinks Hanho is sad about his previous girlfriend and he is seeing things in the sky because he spends most of his time playing video games. Sungwoo tells Hanho to snap back to reality and they both head towards their respective classes. During the lectures, Sungwoo becomes a bit dizzy and it's hard for him to stay awake. Suddenly, a blackout happens and all lights went out. A system message popped up in front of everyone in the class. It was written in the system message to pick a class which can help them in the apocalypse. After that, a 15 seconds timer started and different skill cards with stars appeared in front of the class. Some students panicked and asked others not to pick anything because it could be dangerous. Sungwoo is skeptical about them and thinks not choosing a card within the 15 seconds is going to be even more dangerous. Sungwoo tried to pick a warrior card with 2 stars, but a fat kid Min-soo picked it before him and a sword appeared in his hand. Sungwoo became a bit panicked and picked a random card with the most stars. The card he picked belonged to the 5 stars Necromancer class and the skill card went inside him. After the timer was up, Sungwoo and the fat kid Min-soo were the only ones who had chosen any cards. The fat kid Min-soo is amazed by his new sword. After a while, a student rushes in the class and there's a small monster on his back which looks like a goblin and he's constantly stabbing the shoulder of the student who is crying for help. He keeps crying for help until the goblin kills him in cold blood. Sungwoo starts running away from the goblin, leaving Sungwoo at the front because they think it's their turn next. Some students request Min-soo to do something because he's the only guy with the sword. But Min-soo is a coward and he's not quick enough to adapt to this situation. Sungwoo also thinks that depending on Min-soo is useless and he has to get out of this situation on his own. The goblin plunges towards Sungwoo with this small dagger. Sungwoo thinks that he will also be done for if he gets caught up like the previous kid. The goblin killed. Sungwoo kicks the goblin with all of his might, which throws the goblin a bit back. Sungwoo realized that the goblin barely felt like it was 30 pounds and he can easily kill it. He picks up a chair and smashes the head of the goblin with all of his force. The goblin is defeated and he receives 10 gold from the system for defeating the goblin. Everyone is shocked after watching this. Sungwoo is quick to adapt to this situation and realizes that the world is fused with the game. Sungwoo is busy understanding the current situation. A system message pops up which tells Sungwoo that he can command the dead under his authority. He touches the goblin skeleton option in his command list, and the dead goblin behind him reanimates as a skeleton. At this point he understands that his necromancer class allows him to summon the undead beings. 2 more goblins rush inside the classroom. Sungwoo orders his undead skeleton to kill those 2 goblins. The skeleton plunges at one goblin and it stabs him in the shoulder. The stab wound is not deep enough, and he gets pushed back by the goblin. Both goblins gang up on him and start chopping off his bones one by one. Sungwoo thinks that he needs to help his skeleton, and getting rid of these 2 goblins is easy. But he needs a proper weapon, so he asks Min-soo for his sword, but Min-soo is a coward and rejects him. Sungwoo thinks he is pretty pathetic and asks him to use his sword to peel potatoes. Sungwoo picks up another chair and throws it towards the 2 goblins who were attacking his skeleton. The goblins are knocked back a bit by the chair, and the undead skeleton seizes this chance to end them both with his knife. Sungwoo receives 20 gold for defeating both goblins. After the fight ended, Sungwoo received another system message that he has maxed out the number of minions under his authority. His classmates asked him about what he had done, and he has also no idea about the ongoing events. Other students think that the same thing is happening all over the campus because they can hear screaming voices of others, but when Sungwoo opens the curtains on the windows, he witnesses fires all around the city. Minsa decides that they need to leave the campus if they want to survive. In the corridor, they encounter more goblins which start chasing them, but they are all subdued by Sung Woo's undead skeletons. While Sung Woo's skeletons are fighting the goblins, he asks the other students to run away while they hold the goblins. Sung Woo also realized that this world is now working like a game, and he can get more stronger if he keeps killing goblins and grinding levels. Meanwhile, one of his undead skeleton gets defeated and his head comes flying near him. Luckily, the goblins are exhausted and his two are the skeletons manage to kill them, which earns him 20 gold and a level up. He is now on level 2 and he has access to his status to window. 5 random skill cards appear in front of him, and he can choose one as a level up gift. He chose a card which increased his maximum number of minions by 1. He can now control up to 4 undead skeletons at once, but he has used up most of his mana because he called up so many skeletons. Sung Woo looks outside the window, and it seems like the situation outside is worse than the campus itself. While he is going downstairs with his skeletons, Han Ho gets freaked out by one of his skeletons and stabs it in the head. Han Ho becomes relieved after seeing Sung Woo alive. Sung Woo tells him that these skeletons are part of his skill. Sung Woo asks which class did Han Ho picked, and Han Ho replies that he picked 1-star row class. They are both heading down the stairs with the skeletons, but suddenly a message pops up saying that they have received synergy with a dagger. It turns out if 5 members of a party have a dagger equipped, they will receive a 10% fatal blow chance and 10% additional gold. While they are moving down the stairs with the skeletons, they encounter another pack of goblins, and there is a goblin chief among them. The goblins become affected by a skill called Sin of Death, which weakens their stats by 30%. Sin of Death activates automatically when there are 4 to 5 skeletons present in a party. Skeletons start attacking the goblins, but the goblin chief activates a skill called Wild Berserker, which buffs all the goblins under his command. The goblins become more powerful and start pushing back the skeletons. Sung Woo knows that they are being pushed back because of the skill of the goblin chief, so he ordered one of his skeletons to cut off the arm of the goblin chief, which he is using for the berserker skill. The skeleton manages to chop off the arm of the chief, which weakens the goblins, and the skeletons finish them off with ease. Goblin chief is enraged, but he is easily killed by the skeletons working in synergy. Sung Woo receives one-handed, crude spear and the bracelet of the goblin chief, which he was using for the berserker skill. He becomes a bit happy and praises one of his skeletons, who starts making weird creepy noises with his bones. When they reach the entrance of the campus, they see a lot of survivors. Sung Woo orders his skeletons to hide in the copy room because people will freak out after watching them. Situation on the entrance doesn't feel any good. They are locked inside the campus and they can't go out. While Sung Woo tries to head outside using the main door, he is stopped by one of the student council members, Jin Sok, who was previously famous for being a bully and harasser. He tells them that he is a shield master with 2 stars and he already killed one of the goblins. He further elaborates that everyone with a weapon should work together to defend the other students. Minsu comes running towards Jin Sok and reports that he heard faint sound of goblins near the entrance. Jin Sok orders the students to get inside the cafes, who he and the other guys with skills can protect them. Sung Woo tells Han Ho to come near the entrance of the gate. They see a message on the entrance that the entrance door has been sealed by a magical force, and they need to defeat the boss monster within 2 hours and 11 minutes. If they fail to defeat the monster within a given time frame, the monsters inside the building will grow even stronger. Sung Woo now knows what he needs to do next, but he is stopped by Jin Sok, who wants them to hold the monsters in there until backup arrives. Sung Woo tells Jin Sok that this same thing can be happening around the whole country and waiting for a rescue team is useless, but Jin Sok refutes by saying that the Korean military is more stronger than the monsters. Sung Woo has enough of this bullshit and starts heading towards the stairs, but he is stopped by an approaching group of 5 goblins. Sung Woo orders his skeletons to come out. After watching the skeletons, everyone freaks out because they think skeletons are part of the monsters unit, but Sung Woo tells them that they don't need to be scared because they belong to his class, which is stronger than the idiot Jin Sok. Goblins get scared by the Death Sand skill of the skeletons, and it reduces their stats by 30%. Sung Woo orders his goblins to start the hunt. Meanwhile, people in the cafeteria were panicking and making noise as they watched what was happening through the windows. A group of guys looked through the glass in shock, seeing the goblins approaching. Jong-sik opened his mouth in horror and cursed, not understanding what was happening. In a narrow corridor, the goblins engaged in a furious battle with the skeletons, both sides armed with daggers. One of the yellow-eyed fanged creatures sitting on the floor after the blow, was clutching his sore head. In some places, the attacks caused bright flashes, in which goblins screamed furiously. Sung-woo grimly held the spear in front of him with both hands, preparing to attack. Two bony, resurrected creatures were now fighting back the goblins, who were flying back from the powerful blows. The necromancer sharply began to swing his spear, cutting down the short opponents who were trying to flee in panic. Chung-sok, covering himself with a shield, watched the fight in horror, while the frightened Minzu hid behind him, covering his mouth. The two goblins opened their yellow eyes wide, shaking in fear of the man. Sunwoo, lowering his fist to the floor, shouted furiously so that the monsters would not be allowed to leave and asked to block the stairs. Two combat skeleton assistants with daggers immediately appeared in the air, blocking the retreat of the opponents, and flashes sparkled under their feet from the high speed. Seeing this, the necromancer clenched his hand into a fist and shouted joyfully. After that, the guy, gritting his teeth, glanced back with concern, thinking that if someone found out about his ability, they would rely on him to save him. A picture of armed heroes confronting the monster surfaced in the main character's head when he decided that he would team up with the guys and defeat Bracelet. Creating a magic circle and an orange glow, a notification announced the essence of the artifact. Now the guy watched as skeletons with orange energy fought goblins without much difficulty, mentally concluding that there must be worse opponents in this game. The students watched the necromancer in bewilderment, realizing that he could control the undead. One shocked girl widened her eyes and asked which faculty the necromancer was from, to which she was told that he was from writing. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, skeletons crawled on the floor while one of the goblins attacked them and tried to escape. Noticing this, Seong-woo swung his spear furiously and gritted his teeth. He hit the tip of the weapon directly in the lower back of the short monster, lifting him into the air and piercing him through. Having defeated the goblin, the guy looked up and exhaled with relief, realizing that he had succeeded. The crowd, watching from the sidelines, rejoiced and encouraged the hero. Two happy guys were happily discussing Sunwoo, and everyone else was calm while the necromancer was nearby. The corpses of monsters lay on the tiles, around which blood spread in puddles. Descending the stairs, Seong-woo looked around in bewilderment and did not find any objects, and his skeleton assistant stood nearby. Suddenly, a notification from the system appeared in front of the main character, informing him of a reward for killings in the form of a lottery ticket with an unlimited rating. The necromancer cast a blank look at the tablet, because he could not use the gift due to lack of inventory. While Sunwoo was putting the ticket in his pocket, skeletons and Hanho began to approach him from both sides, and the guy praised his squad for the work they had done. Suddenly, the resurrected creatures began to terribly click their fangs in chorus, and the main character, greatly frightened, asked them not to do that. Two guys, surrounded by skeletons, calmly descended from the stairs where four guys were standing. Raising an eyebrow and slinging the spear over his shoulder, Seong-woo concluded with a grin that it was useful. Chung-sok, hearing this, looked at the guy in shame, twisting his mouth and breaking out in a cold sweat. The guys headed to the cafeteria doors. Now, in addition to the crowd of frightened students and defenders, there was a squad of curious skeletons inside. Seong-woo spoke seriously to the crowd of people, mentioning the message on the door, and everyone began to panic and ask what they should do. Pointing to the burning sign, the main character stated that the solution was on it, and said that the boss of the monsters was located somewhere. The crowd began to look at each other in panic, not wanting to do anything. Sunwoo held out 2 fingers, indicating that they had approximately that many hours left to defeat the main monster. A skeleton assistant stood in front of the necromancer while he gave an inspiring speech to motivate the guys to action. One guy from the crowd of students raised his hand with a scared look, saying that he had seen the boss of the monsters. He recalled how he went out to smoke on the roof, and a huge shaggy monster appeared there and mercilessly killed their professor. Then Sunwoo raised his head and firmly decided that their goal was now the roof. Orange mana continued to burn behind the doors, and the main character clarified that no one else would go with him. The guys all hesitated and lowered their eyes. Then the necromancer turned to the defenders, but they also did not show any determination, coughing and turning away in shame. Sunwoo calmly concluded that he was in vain hoping for help from others, and Hanho put his hand to his mouth, calling out to his comrade in a whisper. Laughing awkwardly and scratching the back of his head, the partner admitted that he also wanted to stay here, to which the main character answered negatively with a smile. Then Hanho was horrified, pitifully holding out his dagger, but Xiangmu frowned and waved away such a proposal. The two guys turned around sharply when a question came from behind them about further actions after the monster was defeated from an armed girl. Looking around, the brunette with a hand on her hip concluded that they could try to reach the roof through the corridors. After this, the tiger hunter Jaisu looked closely at the main character, remembering that he had skeletons, and deciding that in this case, there was no point in taking cowards with him. The girl turned around with a fierce look, her red eyes blazing as the guys looked at her in shock. Sun Wu calmly glanced at Jisoo, thinking that it was better to recruit more guys, because they didn't know the boss's powers. The necromancer turned to Jiang Sik in bewilderment, asking if he would join, and he opened his mouth in shock. Panicking and covered in cold sweat, the student began to justify why he should stay. Then Sunwoo glanced displeasedly at the coward, who had been trying to appear cool all this time. The detachment of 3 guys decided to move out onto the dark passages, because the journey could take a lot of time. The trio, surrounded by skeletons, looked up warily as they climbed the steps. Holding the railing, Jisoo glanced down while the necromancer calmed Hanho. A pair of angry goblins, sparkling yellow eyes in the darkness, rushed towards the guys from below, which the girl warned her partners about with a scream. Xianggu and the skeletons took fighting positions, and the same short monsters began to emerge from above. The main character screamed in panic, asking his 2 partners to cover him. Jisoo swung her katana furiously, leaving red streaks in the air, and confidently rushed towards one of the goblins. With one swing, the girl cut through the enemy's body, and drops of blood rose into the air. Another goblin, noticing Jisoo, began to run so as not to die from her attack. While flying, the girl looked back, noticing the fleeing monster. In the next instant, she stabbed right through the goblin, lifting him into the air as he screamed in pain. The monster, struck by the attack, flew back sharply while thick blood flowed from its through wound. Jisoo, frozen with her katana lowered, looked menacingly in front of her and took a breath. Standing behind her, Hanho widened his eyes and opened his mouth in shock, clutching the hilt of the dagger with both hands. After that, he turned to Sunwoo with a smile, joyfully concluding that his new partner was very cool. The guy abruptly pulled out the tip of a spear from the goblin's corpse, along which a trickle of blood ran. The necromancer, surrounded by skeletons and corpses of opponents, turned around in bewilderment at the sounds. The undead, wandering among the lifeless bodies of goblins, suddenly froze with daggers in their bony hands. When Sunwoo looked at Hanho, Hanho put his finger to his lips and concluded in panic that Sungshan's words were true. The necromancer, breathing out a sigh of relief, offered to move on with a smile. Hanho and Jason now walked one after another up the unlit steps of the long staircase. When a main character got up, he was horrified to find Professor Huang's body against the wall in a pool of blood. Sunwoo hurried to call out to the dying man, and he recognized the young man's voice. The guy opened his mouth in panic, asking how the teacher was feeling, but he could barely speak, coughing up blood. Professor Huang lowered his head and sobbed bitterly, admitting that the students died because of him. Sunwoo looked at his interlocutor in horror and asked him to calm down, and he, trembling violently, remembered how he and the guys went to the laboratory. The professor concluded that they could not stay there for long, so he suggested going up to the roof. They had a contingency briefing, so they headed up without fear. Then Sunwoo widened his eyes and clenched his teeth in tension, wondering what happened next. The professor said that a terrible monster appeared on the roof and attacked the guys. 3 partners, standing in the dark, surrounded by skeletons, began to look around. Spitting blood through his teeth, Huang asked Sunwoo to never go up to the roof. The man grabbed the shocked guy by the jacket, demanding that he survive. After these words, Professor Huang lowered his head and died, and the trio looked at him sadly. The necromancer tightly grasped the spear in his hand engulfed in a blue glow. Blue mana sparkled above the gloomy hero's bowed head. A system window popped up in front of the young man, notifying him of an exclusive task to avenge the death of the professor. Reading the description, Sun Wu decided that fate was a turning point that could change his entire life. The necromancer clenched his teeth from tension and cast a sad glance at the man, loudly asking why all this had happened to them. After that, Xiang Wu resolutely headed up the stairs along with the skeletons, and Hanho below asked with bewilderment whether they would really go to the roof. The resurrected goblins turned questioningly to the guy, waiting for him to start moving. Sun Wu cast a menacing glance upward, frowning deeply. The armed trio, accompanied by skeletons, decisively burst into the boss's room, ready to fight the monster. The orange sky burned against the background of the roof, and a column of smoke rose to the left. At the top, a makeshift camp was built with huts and a fire, filled with ferocious yellow-eyed goblins. The monsters carefully examined the corpses of students lying everywhere on the roof. Watching the outrages of the monsters, Xiang Wu grinned angrily and frowned. Behind him, Hanho was pointing at something above in a panic, his eyes widening and his mouth opening in horror. In the distance lay the body of the guy's classmate, which the goblin was greedily biting, raising his hand in a red jacket. Jisoo cast a contemptuous look at the vile creatures, tightly gripping the hilt of her katana and preparing to attack. Hanho looked in bewilderment at Sun Wu, who sharply raised his hand with a bracelet, clenched into a fist, wondering why such terrible things were happening to them. The thought arose in my head that this was due to weakness. Waving his hand, the necromancer walked forward with concentration and called his partners to follow him, concluding that they must become stronger. Hearing the stomping, one of the goblins turned around in bewilderment with wide eyes. He hurried to the other two relatives, revealing their equipment with daggers, and in his own way warned of the approaching people. The goblins stopped running, abandoning all their important matters. All the monsters gathered in one place, surrounding an armed trio of students who arrived on the roof in the company of skeletons. While Song Wu looked intently at the opponents, Hanho asked with a frightened look whether it would be better for them to just run away now. At that time, the skeletons stood nearby, preparing for battle, and the necromancer mentally concluded that the atrocities needed to be stopped. Moving his hand to the side, the main character clenched his fist, and the bracelet on his wrist began to sparkle in an orange glow. After that, a magic circle appeared around the hand, activating a strong ability. A system window popped up indicating that wild madness had been used, increasing damage and attack speed for 10 minutes. And the eerie skeletons began to emit a powerful orange glow. The goblins screamed furiously, rushing towards their opponents with a menacing look. However, the skeletons, creating a barrier of themselves, did not let the ferocious monsters through. One goblin attacked the skeleton with a dagger, but he put out his bony hand in front of him, and the blade got stuck in the space between the radius and ulna. A sudden bright flash illuminated the space, spreading out into orange streams. Shrouded in a bright glow, the goblin now screamed in agony as his body was cut in several places. A fierce battle was fought between the skeletons and the yellow-eyed monsters, and both sides attacked the enemy mercilessly. Watching the fight, Sun Wu furiously shouted for his teammates to use the skeletons as a shield. While the resurrected creature covered the necromancer, he furiously pierced the goblins with a spear. Jisu's eyes glowed red fiercely as she mercilessly cut through the bodies of short opponents. Only one Hanho stood behind the fighting guys, idle, clutching the hilt of his dagger in fear and displeasedly asking why he chose the robber class. The young man began to sob bitterly, shouting offendedly that at first he thought the chosen class was cool, but in fact it turned out to be useless. After a little hysteria, Hanho reached behind his back with his hand, taking out a dagger from his belt. Taking out a compact weapon, the guy closed his eyes and, throwing it forward, screamed furiously. The goblin, his yellow eyes bulging, watched in horror as the blade clearly hit the head of his fellow nearby. Having opened his eyes slightly, Hanho, with snot and tears, began to be perplexed at such unexpected accuracy. The goblins crowded around the monster's corpse, with a dagger sticking out of its head and blood flowing. The young man immediately remembered that he was a master at throwing, and a picture from the university popped up in his head, where he was throwing cutlery out the window with a smile. Noticing the approaching goblin, Hanho confidently struck him with his hand, so that the short creature flew back. One of the monsters watched in horror, as another of his relatives nearby was pierced by a dagger. Hanho spreads his left palm, examining it carefully. Taking on a serious look, the young man, who had noticeably gained weight, concluded that this was his talent. Three goblins against the background of the orange sky at this time looked at each other in panic, holding daggers at the ready. A system window popped up notifying that the smell of death had been activated, reducing the characteristics of opponents, and the skeletons began to exude powerful blue mana, extending far beyond their bony bodies. Creepy skulls with fangs appeared in the air, overtaking the goblins, who were fleeing in horror. A bright flash appeared among the things on the roof. Then the yellow-eyed monsters turned their shocked gazes to the source of the explosion, opening their fanged mouths in fear. Against the backdrop of mountains of things, a fierce, furry creature of colossal size appeared, eyes sparkling and holding a massive club on his shoulder. The goblins abruptly dropped their daggers and fell to their knees, respectfully bowing before the strongest of them. Tiangu and Hanho looked in panic at the leader who had appeared, holding out their weapons in front of them, and the skeleton assistant followed suit. As the eerie figure of the monster boss appeared in front of the trio of students against the backdrop of the bright orange sky, a system window popped up announcing that the great centurion had appeared. The goblins began to raise their daggers, yellow eyes blazing, and joined their ferocious leader, snarling and ready to tear apart their opponents. Xiangwu, gritting his teeth, sharply swung his spear and quickly rushed towards the monsters. At this time, several goblins flew towards him, putting out their arms in an attempt to reach him. Frowning, the necromancer angrily ordered a squad of skeletons and his partners to kill all the monsters. A fierce battle began, and the sound of metal could be heard in the air as opponents fiercely crossed blades. One of the skeletons mercilessly knocked the goblin to the ground and, immobilizing him, raised his dagger to strike. A powerful energy flow was activated from the side, demolishing the undead. Raising his club above his head, the boss of the monsters growled fiercely and flashed his eyes. Seeing this, Sun Wu shouted furiously, warning the guys to dodge. The great centurion delivered powerful blows with his club, smashing the skeletons into pieces in one fell swoop, and fragments of bones rose into the air. The necromancer frowned around the battlefield as several system notifications reported that the undead were now under his control, and a powerful blue glow began to emanate from the skeletons. One of the assistants watched in bewilderment as the enemy rushed towards him. The monster boss angrily swung his massive club, scattering a squad of undead and staring with yellow eyes at the skeleton retreating back. At this time, Sun Wu, clenching his teeth tightly from tension, quickly flew towards the centurion, attacking his assistants. The guy stopped in front of the monster boss, wanting to save his fighter, and suddenly the system reported a strong reduction in mana, after which the main character concluded that he could not constantly resurrect skeletons. After this, a bright flash from a powerful blow appeared in the sky. Many daggers flew at high speed at once into the great centurion's muscular arm. The weapon-throwing Hanho stood with his hand outstretched and, with a malicious smile, asked if he could help restrain the boss of the monsters. Bloody daggers began to fall down as the great centurion, with a fierce look, began to sharply raise his fist to strike and emit a warlike growl. Now Hanho looked at him in panic, not understanding why the monster was angry, and Xiangwu, looking at his partner with bewilderment, said that he had hit him. When the great centurion rushed towards the well-aimed guy, he ran away with loud cries and pleas for mercy. The skeletons with red and blue mana stopped, watching in bewilderment what was happening. Panho, continuing to run away, rejoiced and thanked the guys. The ferocious boss of monsters at Skeleton was flying furiously from behind towards the great centurion, raising a dagger in the air to attack. He sharply thrust the blade into the flesh of the colossal monster and it immediately bared its teeth menacingly, becoming even more ferocious. Turning around, the boss of the monsters kicked the skeletons, attacking him with all his might, and he flew back sharply. As he flew, his bones began to crumble, and remnants of orange mana came out of his eye sockets. The great centurion let out a warlike roar and flashed his eyes as Jisoo began to raise her katana behind him. The girl swung her blade sharply, striking the monster boss with a powerful blow, and the blade left a long, bright streak in the air. Clutching his chest, the great centurion growled angrily as Jisoo stood waiting behind him. She stood proudly over the defeated colossal goblin, katana lowered. Streaks of blood were visible on the girl's face when she said with a menacing look that she would like to kill the great centurion in one blow. Watching Jisu's attacks, Sunwoo concluded with shock that all her movements were refined and meaningful, not like those of an ordinary person. Glancing at the undead army in the blue glow, the guy gloomily decided that he, too, needed to think about a strategy. The boss of the monsters was now sitting on his knees as opponents were approaching him from all sides, among whom were skeletons and the furious Jisoo. One of the necromancer's assistants began to attack the colossal goblin from behind, and the others also suddenly attacked him, drawing daggers. Xiangwu, quickly raising his spear, gritted his teeth with a fierce attitude and flew towards the great centurion. A bright flash appeared around the giant goblin's body from numerous enemy attacks. During a spear strike, a piece of his ear flew off. Growling ferociously, the monster boss grabbed his head, and blood gushed out from his fingers, which the skeleton watched closely. He began to sharply attack the great centurion, who began to cover himself with his hand. Xiangwu, standing behind the skeletons, looked unhappy when the system reported a sharp decrease in mana. The monster boss bared his teeth and, uttering a growl, pointed his finger forward. The monster pointed at the skeleton in front of him. The rest of the undead slumped. Then the great centurion grinned maliciously, realizing that the undead were running out of mana. Sunwoo, gritting his teeth, looked at his opponent with anger and shouted that he had not won yet. Then the boss of the monsters began to furiously swing his massive club, smashing everything in front of him. The pieces of equipment flew straight at the necromancer, who, covering himself with his hands, flew to the side. The great centurion screamed furiously as he raised his club above his head to attack again. Xiangwu watched him in a panic, not understanding what to do next, and afraid that they would all die. Suddenly he looked to the side, discovering a blade protruding from a mountain of things. The monster boss continued to destroy the area. With rage on his face, he destroyed the skeletons one by one. Jisoo, who tried to attack him, was thrown away from a block by the centurion's club. The main character was angry at what was happening. He watched the monster's actions, standing near the destroyed table and shelves. He watched two skeletons running around the monster boss. The protagonist ordered them to stay close to the centurion. Having changed their trajectory, the skeletons, with glowing blue eyes, headed towards him from different directions. With unwavering fury, the centurion launched a circular attack with his hand, destroying two skeletons in an instant. At the same moment, the boss of the monsters noticed an unusual turquoise silhouette flying towards him. A blade glowing turquoise flew over the head of the uncomprehending monster. A skeleton suddenly appeared above the centurion's head and grabbed the flying sword. The skeleton flew over the head of the monster, watching this. In an instant, the skeleton, with the strength of his entire body, sent a sword strike towards the head of the monster boss. The centurion managed to react and block the attack with his club. The skeleton, having received a strong blow to the sword, flew several meters away. The surprised protagonist looked at the information window that appeared. It said that when playing in a team, there's a synergy effect. Pointing to Xiangwu and Jisoo's swords, the window showed a list of synergies. It stated that a first-level warrior gains weapon synergy if he has 3 swords. The effect of this buff is to increase attack speed by 10% and reduce weapon weight by 50%. Looking at the sword-fighting skeleton who had only one arm, the information panel identified him as a one-armed warrior. He received the individual synergy class, which can be obtained if a one-arm sword is obtained. The effect is an 88% chance to block a strike. Turquoise energy appeared near the mouth of the grinning skeleton. Looking at the slightly tired centurion, the main character noted with a little doubt that with synergy and weapons, he could win. The main character, extending his hand behind his body, abruptly grabs a chair and begins to run towards the monster. Suinwoo shouts that he will let him taste the killer taste of this couple. With pure rage and glowing red eyes, Jiju begins to run towards the monster boss. On the other hand, a skeleton jumps out at the centurion with glowing blue eyes. He is preparing to attack with a sword. The monster boss looks around, deciding where to make the first attack. From the blind spot, a chair flies into the monster, and the protagonist flies towards it slightly to the left. Quickly turning around, slightly taken aback, he does not have time to react to several attacks from Jisoo and misses a couple of attacks with his sword. On the other hand, the skeleton also attacks the monster's back. The skeleton looks at the sharply turning centurion. With increased rage, the monster boss strikes the area near the skeleton with his club. At this moment, a blade flies towards the distracted monster. Hanko celebrates the precise blow of his blade into the hand of the monster boss. Growling with anger, with a slightly furious look, he pulls the blade out of his hand through the pain. Sunwoo's eyes light up as he gives commands to the skeletons. The skeleton receives a command. She demands to sacrifice himself. He begins to run towards Centurion, who is taking the sword out of his hand. The main character, looking at the enemy, a skeleton, jumping towards the enemy with a little sadness, thanks him and says goodbye to him. Remembering parts of the skeleton's battle, he thinks that he served him faithfully during this difficult time. The monster begins to wave its arm, looking at the approaching skeleton. Sunwoo thinks that the time has come for the skeleton to die for the sake of a great victory. Squeezing his eyes slightly as he watches the skeleton strike, he screams, slipping over the centurion's hand. The skeleton points its blade towards the monster. The main character looks in surprise at the exchange of blows. The skeleton's attack hits the shocked monster's neck. As he flies past the centurion, he separates his head from his body. Sunwoo looks at the blocking effect in amazement. Jiju and the protagonist look at the skeleton with its head bowed. A few meters away from them lies the dead body of a monster with a severed head. The protagonist receives $2. 55 gold for killing the monster boss. Surprised, Hanko asks the main character what their friend, the skeleton, was doing before his death. Sunwoo gets level 3. Looking at the skeleton, he replies that it seems that this skeleton used to be a simple goblin. A turquoise glowing seal appears on the darkened face of the skeleton. An information window appears above him, notifying him that he has become stronger by absorbing the magic of the monster boss. His defensive power increased sharply, and he received the characteristic of commander. There was also additional information at the bottom of the window that stated that depending on the number of team members, he could receive organized synergy. Pointing a finger at the seal on the skeleton's forehead, the protagonist asks what it is. Looking at the skeleton, who tries to look and touch the mark, he states that the mark has appeared. Sunwoo opened an information window called Subordinate List. It contained information about a level 2 elite skeleton goblin, his weapon, namely a saber, a goblin species, and a category that stated that he was both an undead and a level 1 commander. Imagining the army of skeletons, the protagonist thought that thanks to the organized synergy based on the characteristics of the commander, he would be able to create squads, groups, and platoons, just like in the army. He decides that he needs to quickly increase the number of subordinates. Looking at their information windows, Jisoo and Hanko observe their new level gained. For the girl, this is the 3rd level. Looking back at the main character, she asks what's up with Sunwoo's level. He states that his level has also risen. Looking at the cards that appeared on the board, Jisoo stated that when moving to the 2nd level, she did not pay attention to them at all. Turning to the main character, she asked which card she should choose. The protagonist replied that they are random and you should rely on luck. The protagonist's friend also examined the cards. Looking at his, Sunwoo told him to choose one. Looking at the board, the title of which said to choose a card to move to a new level. And under it, there were 5 cards with random characteristics. The protagonist recalled that at the 2nd level, he chose a skill that gave him more subordinates. With a slight hesitation on his face, he picked up a random card and obtained the basic bow and weapon skill. He revealed the skill information. It was an active class skill that required 10 mana. The brief information stated that Sun Wu could create weapons from bones. The possible weapon types to create were sword, heavy weapon, spear, and arrow. Also at the bottom of the information window, there was information that the final result may vary depending on the type and quality of the material. Also, as soon as the skill level increases, the main character will create better weapons. Looking a little surprised at the window, holding a sword in his hands, the protagonist affirmed that he could make weapons. Looking up, he noticed that the information window for the exclusive task, Revenge for the Professor, began to disappear. An exclusive skill was obtained for this task. Also, additional information stated that the fate of the protagonist was changing imperceptibly. Slightly closing his eyes in sadness, he remembered his bloody, crying professor. Covering the skeletons with turquoise energy, he clarified that he could now take 5 skeletons for himself, because his limit had now been increased. He also thought that it was not at all clear what impact events had on his fate. He concluded that he should be more careful in the elections. Looking back at the sound, Hanko noticed a cloak approaching him from the sky. Examining it in his hands, he concluded that it was a robber's cloak. Pointing to Hanko, who was putting on his cloak, the protagonist asked why he needed it. The protagonist's friend replied that it increases the chance of hiding from monsters by 50%. Making an absolutely serious face, he thought that he was ideal for escaping. Without changing his courageous and serious face, he said that he would never run away again, because from now on his path was battle. Jisoo picked up a small rectangular red stone. Hanko asked what kind of stone it was. She replied that it was a kindling stone. Looking at the stone brought to his face, the protagonist's friend asked if it was for starting a fire. The girl replied no. Imagining a scene with a burning sword, she replied that if you sharpen a sword on this stone, it will ignite when attacked. Looking at the girl putting the stone in a special case, Hanko said that this was very cool. Standing with the skeletons, Sun Wu, pointing to the exit, suggested that they try out the items later and now return to the others. Several people with weapons and other war items stood near a small cafe. Approaching Jiangxi, Minsu called out to him. Looking back at the few people standing behind him, he asked if they really needed to guard them. Jang Sok, listening to Minsuka, clenched his teeth in anger. At this point, the second guy continued. He asked if it would have been better for them to go help Sunwoo defeat the monster. He stated that they should have listened to him. The guy with glasses cut off his words, and Jang Suk grabbed him by the shoulder. With uncontained anger, he shouted that for their sake, he was risking his life, demanding that they stop talking nonsense. He turned around and walked towards several people they were guarding. They looked back at him questioningly. Standing next to the stunned Minsu, he, holding a shield in his hands, shouted out what they needed from him, why they were all so unhappy. With an angry look, he points to the entrance and shouts that if they no longer want to live, then why should he suffer for their sake? Outraged people asked what he was talking about and where they should go. With his eyes even more wide open with anger, he declared that all dissatisfied people should run to the roof to help the protagonist. People asked who he even was. He replied that he was protecting them. They answered him a little impudently that it was not he who was protecting them, but those who went to the roof. Blushing with anger, he said that since high school he had tried to hold back for the sake of others. One of the standing guys, slightly annoyed, demanded to repeat it. An angry Jong Sik pointed at him and told him to speak up. He said that since they were protected by that cretin from the roof, then let him go to him and the monster would kill them all. With inhuman fury, he declares that although he has already been dealt with in any way. People looked at him in surprise. Spreading his arms to the sides, smiling hysterically, he asked why they were silent. Were they really afraid to face the truth? People asked who had been decided. Jong Sik squirmed in anger. Remembering the skeletons of the main character, he screamed with hatred. Looking at the fallen Jong Sik, one guy from the crowd said that he wished him dead. He remembered the magically sealed door. He, in the company of those fighting on the roof, approached her. The protagonist opened the seal. The fallen Chung Sok looked worriedly towards the rest of the company. Sun Woo turned to him and said that he was starting to get in the way.